So before we move on to another effect, I'd like to make things a little more dynamic, move things around a bit more. Sort of like with our ping pong delay, we have things panning left and right, but it's doing that actively and automatically. We can have that happen by bringing back that concept of envelopes. So we're going to draw our own custom envelopes, but then we're going to automate envelopes. And eventually, we'll make it to the point where we'll be able to create envelopes within a gaming engine like Unity to create interactive audio that morphs based on some sort of foreign input. So let's start out with a simple example. We're going to draw an envelope over time that will affect the panning. Let's make this base kind of meander throughout its sequence. So click on this trim icon here. You can see that it's almost this triangle with only 2 lines. And it opens up this window that shows you every parameter on your track. These parameters include the volume, pan, width, etc., but also the parameters that are in your effects. So we can see that our resample-o-matics parameters are here. I could change the decay or sustain, for example, in real time. We've got our repitch, distortion, and EQ, and every single parameter that you see in your effect. So here's my re-EQ. We've got each of these parameters. Each parameter has its own frequency, gain, bandwidth, etc. That is listed out here. So we can target each of those bands, their frequency, gain, and bandwidth. But I'm just going to focus on the pan because that is a very simple example. And I am going to activate the envelope by clicking on the box next to it. And after I click that box, you'll notice that a line has appeared under my track. And so every box that you check is going to produce a new line with a different color. The colors are there just to help prevent any sort of confusion between your envelopes. And you'll notice if I expand this a bit that there is a node on my line. With lighter colors, it's a little harder to see, but there, by default, is a node at the very beginning. And I can click and drag that node, and it will drag the line up and down. I can also just click and drag the line as a whole. But that node is there, essentially like a keyframe. You've got this point in time, and you want to transform your parameter over time. So you are placing that node at the point in time that you want that change to happen. And so I can create another node at another point in time by holding Shift and clicking on the line, and that's going to create a new node. And now if I drag this node up, you'll see that we now have a slant going from the previous node to our new node. And so I can Shift click and make another one and drag this all the way down. And so with panning, all the way up is left. You can see as you hover, we are now 100% left. And it also tells you at what point in time. And then if you drag it all the way to the bottom, that pans all the way to the right. So just to demonstrate that, we can hear that the bass is going to meander all the way to the left. And then it's going to hit that node and then start making its way all the way to the right. And it's going to stay there because we have just set that node as the last node. So that's how to draw straight lines. So you can also make these lines curved. So if I click on a point and say, for example, fast end, that is going to set a curve, and this will gradually ramp, starting out very slow, but once it gets closer to that point in time, it will speed up towards the left. But we don't have to be precise either. We can be more organic by hand drawing these lines. So if I hold the Control key or Command on Mac and then click and drag, I can draw an organic line. And now this is really going to meander all around. And so that's just a simple introduction to these envelopes. But what if I wanted an envelope that is going back and forth at a constant rate? I could hand draw it by adding a bunch of points at every point in this grid. And then I can select every other point, drag these down, and then drag these up. And we've sort of got these triangles now. And if I select one of these and hit Control or Command A to select all of them, copy it, and then paste that envelope in to have it repeat over and over again. So this envelope is now forming these nice even triangles continuously, so we get this nice tick-tock effect with our base. We don't have to hand draw it. We can have it automated. So if I clear out this envelope by clicking this button here, and I can instead use a function called parameter modulation. So I want to still affect the panning here. I want to add a new effect to this bass track, and so I'm going to look up volume and find volume/pan smoother. And what this effect does is it's really just kind of a utility where we can take control of that panning through an effect rather than doing it directly in our track. And the reason to do that is so that we can automate this. So if I click on this button here that says param, short for parameter, and then there will be a drop-down. Your drop-down may look a little different from this, but you should be able to find this menu item. Going down here to FX parameter list, I'm going to find parameter modulation. Again, this item may not be in the same place on your computer, but there should somewhere in this menu be parameter modulation. And then I'm going to select pan so that I can directly affect that pan. And you'll notice here you've got a few different checkboxes. We won't get into the top and bottom one. Instead, we're going to click on the middle. And that is a low frequency oscillator. That may sound like an intimidating technical word, but all it is really describing is oscillation, moving one way and then the other, back and forth. Vibrations are oscillations, but vibrations tend to happen at much higher frequencies. These oscillations are slow. They're not vibrations we would hear. You can see here that we are moving back and forth at 1 hertz, meaning 1 cycle per second. So if a string was vibrating at 1 hertz, that would be too slow for us to perceive. But that slow rate is great for applying to effects, which can influence the sound of our signal. And so if I play this, you're now going to hear this track pan at this rate. And it's sticking over on the right side, so I'm going to click centered here, and that should center it. And now we're panning evenly between the left and right. Negative will make it pan only from the middle to the left, and positive will make it only pan from the middle to the right. Strength is going to affect how strong that oscillation is applied. So if I were to set this to 25%, it's going to stick around the middle still, but only pan a quarter of the way left and right, which is the equivalent of me just panning like this. Right? So I'm going to ramp that all the way back up to 100. And you can see speed, obviously, is how fast that oscillation is happening. So if I want something much more gradual and drawn out, maybe less perceptible for your listener, I can slow it down. I can also speed it up. And you're going to get this interesting flutter effect when it's applied to our pan here. Set that back to 1. And so here we have our shape, and right now it's set to a sine wave, which is a smooth ramping up and down, almost like which you can almost think of as a circle. And we have these other shapes. So a square is not going to ramp at all. It's just going to cling to one side or the other here. And that may be a little more apparent if I tempo sync. So that it is matching our beats to a certain degree. A lot of interesting things can come out that way. Because you're synced to the tempo, you can come out with a lot more interesting rhythms. We've got saw left and right, and those will ramp up and then drop down immediately. So if you were to visualize this, it would look like saw teeth, where it's ramping, then dropping, and left and right are ramping and dropping one way or the other. Triangle is the equivalent of that wave I drew, where everything looked like a triangle. It's just a linear ramping up and down. So it's similar to the sine wave in that it's going up and down in a constant motion, but this is linear where sine is curved. And then random is just gonna kind of go crazy back and forth at a random pace, unpredictable. So by automating effects in this way, you can add some more dynamism to your tracks. And I'm gonna slow this all the way down to make it really meander back and forth. So let's expand this idea of automated envelopes with a new effect. And I'm gonna apply this effect to the entire song here. So I want to open up my master track by clicking View Master Track. And I'm gonna click the effects button here and search for phaser and select 4-tap phaser. What a phaser does is it duplicates a signal and it offsets that duplicate. And that ends up creating interference patterns within the signal, which modulates frequencies. So you end up with this sweeping effect. It's a bit hard to describe, but I can best imitate it by making this noise. That has been your ASMR section of this tutorial. So let's listen to this effect in action. And I can change the rate of that, so I can slow it down for a much more gradual, dramatic effect. Bring up the range, make it more pronounced. So you can hear just these added frequencies modulating. If I speed it up, it's gonna start to get a little crazy. Adding very pronounced resonance to our track. So what if we automate this? I'm gonna click here on parameter, find that parameter modulation link, and let's modulate the rate. So the phaser is already doing this modulation, but what if we modulate that modulation? Clicking on the LFO here, and I'm gonna make this very, very gradual. Move it to the center. And have it start at the center by moving this slider to the center. So it feels a little more dreamy, a little more trippy. And because we're gradually modulating the rate, we're getting these interesting little flares when that rate goes up to the top. As that rate climbs to the very top, we get some interesting added rhythms to our track. It's a lot more subtle and abstract when you're playing with the frequencies of a tone. But you can open up a lot of interesting possibilities. I'm just going to drag this out so that phase can continue. So now let's wrap up these effects and finish out our song with one final very funky effect, and that is the flanger. I haven't done enough to my mid track here, so I'm going to add it there. Look up flange. I'm going to select Flange Baby, just because that's a fun name. The term flange comes from reel-to-reel tapes. It was discovered that if you put pressure on the tape reel as the tape was running and had that tape read by two separate magnets, then you would end up with sort of a phasing effect, but a bit funkier than a proper phaser. It's probably easiest just to demonstrate how it sounds. And I'm actually going to mute out my effects, my master track effect, so that that phaser isn't interfering here. So to make this effect very pronounced and easier to hear the effect in action, I'm going to increase the depth here. And that's going to affect how strong that modulation is. And I'll also raise the feedback a bit. And so this is kind of a subtle track. And so now if I increase the delay, it's delaying that duplicate signal to give us these crazier interference patterns. And it's starting to sound more and more demented here. I can change the speed. And now we're getting really crazy, trippy aliens, demons. Bring that delay back down. Less crazy, but still a little unsettling. Increasing the mix increases how strong that effect is overall. Bringing that feedback up amplifies the amount of repetitions. And now we're just going real crazy, and this is going to sound horrible. This is probably going to sound very horrible when I unsolo this. Discordant. So let's bring this back down. Ground it a bit more. I want that effect a little more subtle. And so it's kind of detuning a bit, giving you this little unsettling feeling, good at describing madness in certain ways. That's actually a bit too much for me, so I'm actually going to just get rid of that flange and leave it there. And I'll bring back my phaser. And so that is a brief overview of how to write a song. Obviously, we have kept things very simple by using a very simple phrase. This would get pretty monotonous, and hopefully hasn't sounded too monotonous over the course of this tutorial, but obviously if you were to continue playing this song, you might go a little crazy. But add in more scales, more variety with your melody, and then you'll have a much more engaging song. So that will wrap up this tutorial. This has been a demonstration of how to create a song by limiting yourself to scales, applying effects, making those effects dynamic through envelopes, and highlighting the strengths of your individual tracks by playing with their speed, changing the frequencies that are passing through, and routing and processing audio signals in clean and cohesive ways. You might not win a Grammy if you make a song like this, but it can make some great background music for your virtual applications. So in the next tutorial, we will talk about how to do the equivalent of what we have done here in Unity. We will take our audio file and then apply effects dynamically based on input parameters. See you then.